Hello, everyone, and welcome to our event, Evolution or Disconnection in Contemporary Iranian Art. My name is Shiva Tabatabai-Nejad. I'm an alumna of Georgetown's School of Foreign Service and Georgetown's Persian program. I will be assisting with the question and answer portion of the event. Please use the Q&A button to submit questions so that I may get them to our moderator at an opportune time. As always, questions are welcome in English, Persian, and Finglish. Although I may not acknowledge your question, please continue to submit them throughout the event, and I'll be sure to keep track. I have the honor of introducing the founder and director of Georgetown's Persian language program, Professor Fatima Mostofi.
خانم‌ها آقایان سلام. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Persian Studies program of Georgetown University, I would like to welcome you to our panel, Evolution or Disconnection in Contemporary Iranian Art, our second Jalinous lecture series in the form of webinar. We really appreciate your presence today and your interest in our cultural events. We are planning to have 2 more events in February and April that you will receive soon the information. Let me also extend my gratitude to the Jalinous family that without their help, these cultural events would not have taken place. Now I'm pleased to present you our panelists. Dr. Maryam Ekhtiar is curator in the Department of Islamic Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She was a key member of curatorial team responsible for the reinstallation of the Met's galleries of the Arab lands, Turkey, Iran, Central Asia, and later South Asia, from 2004 to its opening in 2011. She has published widely in the field of 19th and 20th century Persian art and culture, including calligraphy and later Persian painting. Dr. Talinn Grigor is a professor of art history and chair in the Department of Art and Art History at the University of California, UC Davis. Her research focuses on 19th and 21st century art and architectural histories of Iran and Parsi India. Her books include Contemporary Iranian Art, From the Street to the Studio in 2014. The work of Ali Banisadr, born in 1976 in Tehran, Iran, demonstrates a careful balancing act between chaos and composure, and abstract and figurative painting and drawing. His complex, expansive paintings are rich with autobiographical narratives, historical references, and sonic recollection. Banisadr has been shown in major museums and galleries for more than a decade, and currently has 2 solo museum exhibitions at Wadsworth Atheneum Museum, Hartford, Connecticut, and at the Benaki Museum in Athens, Greece. He also has an upcoming solo exhibition at Museo Stefano Bardini Palazzo Vecchio in Florence, Italy, and a major monographic publication with the Casmin Gallery. Our moderator, Dr. Layla Diba, is an independent art advisor, scholar, and curator specializing in the art of 19th and 20th century Iran. She has been the director and chief curator of the Negalistan Museum of 18th and 19th century Iranian art in Tehran from 1975 to 1978, and the Brooklyn Museum of Art curator of Islamic art from 1990 to 2000. She organized the exhibition Royal Persian Paintings, the Qajar Epoch, in 1998, co-organized Iran Modern in 2013, and edited the accompanying publications. Now I'm pleased to welcome our panelists.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay. My thanks to Georgetown University, Dr. Farima Mostofi, and the Jalinous Foundation for their gracious invitation to moderate this afternoon's discussion. Can we begin with the PowerPoint, please, Lynn? I will give a few words of introduction. Beginning in the 19th century, there is a turn in Persian art from decorative, small-scale manuscript painting, image please, to large-scale illusionistic painting in oil on canvas or murals. Image please. This shift began in the mid-17th century palaces of Isfahan, but became widespread and institutionalized under the Qajars, especially Fath Ali Shah, the second ruler. By the second half of the 19th century, European-style academic painting becomes the norm, seen here in the work of its leading exponent, Muhammad Ghaffari, Kamal al-Mulk, image please, known as the father of Iranian modern art. The introduction of photography furthers the triumph of realism. Image, please. Yet concurrently, the traditional arts persist and even flourish in new forms such as coffee house paintings. Image, please. In the first half of the 20th century, during the constitutional and early Pahlavi eras, the school of Kamal al-Mulk persisted, while Safavid revival art emerged, expressions of the twin national ideals of heritage and modernization. Image. Thank you. In the same time, Iranian art lagged considerably behind modernist developments in Europe. This delicate balance between tradition and innovation would continue after World War II and become a hallmark of modern Iranian art, as would other features first associated with the late 19th century, such as colonial influence, now described as Westoxication or Garbzadegi, and the resulting critiques of modernity and explorations of artistic identity. Keeping these issues in mind, we see that after World War II, Iranian art finally began to catch up with developments in Europe, as the naturalism of Kamal al-Mulk and his school was challenged by a newly emerging avant-garde, and the Cubist style was introduced. Next image, please. Concurrently, artists began searching for a national yet modern style, which led to the Saqakhani movement, a movement that developed into an authentic Iranian visual language, blending abstraction, calligraphy, and popular art forms. Next image, please. This movement coexisted with other tendencies. Image, such as references to the Qajar tradition in the work of Ovaisi, calligraphic modernism, next image, gestural abstraction, next image, international modernism, next two images, please. And even neo-surrealism. Next image. Struggles between nationalism and internationalism, evolution and rupture, modernity and tradition continue after the establishment of the Islamic Republic of Iran in 1979. After a brief period of propaganda art in the 1980s and 90s, image please, and the resulting rupture with the Pahlavi era, these established tendencies reemerge: calligraphy, sakvakhane, abstraction, in addition to postmodern approaches to Neo-Safavid and Qajar art. Images, please. Here is Neo-Safavid and Qajarid art. Next image, please. In the case of photography, the problems of globalism develop as Iranian artists emigrate and aspire to become part of a global art scene. Diasporic art emerges. The next two images. And today, the latest trend is caused by Iran's cultural and political isolation is the development of alternative art forms in unconventional and unofficial spaces, which really began in the 1990s, but I think is probably flourishing now that other avenues of creativity are closed. And this development is being studied in a forthcoming publication by Pamela Karimi. In conclusion, I would say that the evolution of Iranian modern art was not a straightforward march to abstraction. Rather, it was a multiverse process rather than a linear progression. So with these remarks, now we will pass to the theme of our panel discussion today, understanding contemporary Iranian art. Is it an evolution or a rupture with the past? Although I will address questions to each of our distinguished panelists individually, we also encourage lively discussion among our panelists. We ask the panelists keep their answers to 5 to 10 minutes. So I would like to begin by inviting Maryam Ekhtiar to present on the general outlines of the question of continuity and rupture. Excuse me, the last slide is up because before Ali Banisadr, there was also a slide of the recent Iranian representation in Venice and the Spark is You presentation of Parasol Unit, again showing you the last developments before the real isolation Iran entered into. Okay, Maryam.
So hello, everybody. I'm pleased to be here, and I'm going to talk briefly about the idea of Iranian modernism, rupture or continuity. And the question of rupture and continuity is a complex one that doesn't have a clear answer. Until recently, the study of Middle Eastern modernism had been largely based on European modernist art history. So the question of rupture automatically became associated with Iran's reaction to a movement that occurred in Europe and made its way across the globe at different moments in time. So local modernisms emerged, each with their own distinct characteristics and forms, and Iranian modernism was one of them. So did the advent of European modernism change the course of Iranian art is the question. And in my personal opinion, there was not a clear break. There were significant changes and discontinuities in patronage, in the systems of producing art, but there was also a thread of continuity. And the production of art did not end in the 19th century, and one cannot say that that art lives in a distant past or is removed and remote from what followed. There is definitely a connection. And in the Qajar period, for example, in the late Qajar period, to be modern had different meanings And in the late Qajar period, to be modern was equated with being Western, being able to faithfully copy a Western painting or to produce a photorealistic work was highly prized. And perhaps this was a reaction to the age-old tradition of miniature painting, which was prized for its true dimensionality, its high horizon line, attention to patterning, detail, and its sort of remote quality. And miniature painting was meant to please and delight, and rather than arouse emotion in a viewer. And on the screen, you see a miniature painting on the left, and on the right, a realistic painting by the artist Kamalul Mulk, the Qajar artist, late Qajar artist Kamalul Mulk. But Iranian artists from the 1940s onward became aware of Western modernism and wanted to participate in this global conversation. Many had visited and or studied in Europe, and this was an era of post-colonial nationalism. So they were focused on the nation and reevaluating their own legacies of tradition. Art became a space where they negotiated their desire to be a member of the global community with their desire to celebrate their own cultural roots. Art also became an expression of expressing an expression of political concerns. As the scholar Shiva Balaghi stated, the construction of modernity in Iran was an act of resistance and creation. Iranian visual artists began to appropriate the traditional role of the poet as Iranian society's all-seeing critic. So the art of this period used the language of abstraction, du voice, dissent, and social discontent. And this was a process of selective appropriation and reinterpretation. Iranian modern art of the 1960s, I can maybe, and 70s looked inward toward the local and the authentic, toward popular and vernacular street culture, the underprivileged, neglected segments of Iranian society. And I would say that to an extent, artists of that period picked up and continued the threads that had originated in the Qajar period. The shift from the royal to the elite to the populace started occurring in the second half of the 19th century under Nasiruddin Shah. And at that time, the emergence of photography, lithography, the passion plays, coffee house paintings, which commemorated Imam Hussein's martyrdom at Karbala, and the focus on Shiite ritual objects brought the arts into the sphere of the populace. This was a dramatic change in direction at that time. And for example, we know also that Saqakhane artists and modern artists of the 1960s and 70s, such as Parviz Panavoli, Hossein Zenderudi, Marcos Grigorian, and later Sia Armajani, drew on this body of popular art. Parviz Panavoli collected talismans and late 19th century and 20th century prints, Shiite ritual objects, alams, etc. Marcus Grigorian collected coffee house paintings and used them as teaching tools with his students. He also collected mundane everyday objects used by villagers. The late Sia Armajani, for example, collected talismans, stamps, Siyah Mashq pages, prints of Imam Ali, and Munir Farmayan originally started working with behind glass paintings and eventually made the technique of mirror mosaics, aynekari, her life's work. So artists selectively appropriated and reinterpreted these traditional and popular art forms with the intent of commenting and voicing social discontent. And I mean, not all of them were doing that, but many were. And they set the trend for artists today, some of whom use traditional aesthetics as a way of masking a wide array of messages from gender to identity to political and social discontent. So the question is that not a form of continuity? I would say that it was a combination of both. The two forces were at work together. So thank you. I have a few slides, but just I wanted to show you sort of what I just discussed. And here is an image of Imam Ali from a print that belonged to Sia Armajani, where he wrote on it, but on the forehead of Imam Ali is the date 1963, which was the date when Khomeini first started giving speeches and which aroused a lot of protests, and it was a very significant year in Iranian history. So he marks this on the forehead of this figure. And I would like to just end that and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maryam, for that wonderful overview. Can I ask the other panelists if they have any comments? Talinn or Ali? If we don't have any comments, no. Then did I hear something from Ali?
I just said no. It was great. Okay. I learned some new stuff.
Great, great. So now to Talinn, who I will invite to discuss the history of the avant-garde from the 1950s to the 1970s and what she has called the newness, perceived newness of the avant-garde. Talinn, please, welcome.
Thank you so much. Likewise, it's a pleasure to be here. So this question of rupture and continuity, I think that it's a Western paradigm that has been then appropriated by Iranian art historiography, and maybe we can rethink it in terms of rupture of or perceived rupture of the revolution, and then of course the establishment of Christie's branch in Dubai in 2006, and then Sotheby's branch in Doha in 2008, and sort of contemporary Iranian art becomes a market category, and it becomes visible, sort of it's becomes marketable. Of course, it was also a very important moment for Iranian artists who now had physical access and sort of a stage to present themselves to the world. So this moment is very important, and often this moment is spoken about as if that's where the rupture and the continuity it happens. But I've always felt that we keep forgetting Iran's extremely rich and diverse and vibrant, subversive avant-garde art history that came before that. And so I think it's very important to, and let me share my screen just to show you a few images where we have a period after Reza Shah, and so the establishment of Tehran University, Faculty of Fine Arts, those were very important. But right after that, after Reza Shah's exile, there is a moment of political and artistic freedom that opens up between September 1941 and August 1953. And this was a very vibrant moment that we often forget to talk about and when we do talk about it as Iran's subversive and a surrealist moment. One of the major players was Ziapour, who was a typical Reza Shah trained Faculty of Fine Arts, is sent to Europe to the Beaux-Arts by the state, comes back, and then establishes the Fighting Cock Society, which was very important. And around him are gathered in his studio weekly these thinkers, poets, people like Hedayat and who Hedayat inspired. And so there was a network of intellectuals who were actually very anti-mass, anti-populist, and they sort of gathered around this Fighting Cock Society and had connections to each other and to Europe. This is some of the cover of the magazine that they published, and taking both inspiration from Iran's long history, but also very much in tune with what's happening in Europe. They published between 49 and 52, published 9 issues of this combination of art journal with art historical narrative and images and poetry and eventually they gave birth to some of the subversive avant-garde artists that came later on. For example, Bahman Moasses, Adeshir Moasses. I mean, these were inspired in this movement. Houshang Irani was replaced Ziapour in 1951. And they produced, in this very typical subversive movement, they produced this 13-point manifesto. And I particularly love the last point where it speaks about how they are against any kind of conventional thinking. So I think I'm gonna stop sharing that. So I just want to conclude with this notion that Iran's art community has always had a subversive sort of revolutionary history. And it has always been for expression of artistic expression, free artistic expression, for innovation, for borrowing of all sorts, of appropriation of all sorts. And so I find it very difficult when we speak about sort of copying Europe or looking at Europe or going back to something traditional and talking about these terms. I always feel that Iranian artists reinvent themselves, and Iranian art community has its own priorities, has its own momentum, and its own very rich history that we sometimes sort of forget. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Talinn. I agree with all that you've said, and very grateful to have a telescopic look at the Khurus Jangi and the participants there. I also agree that we need to talk about an alternative modernism in Iran and non-European modernisms. And there are as many versions as Maryam mentioned as there are third world countries, and also develop a new way of understanding and thinking about these questions, not just adopting European categories. So it's very interesting that I think we are all coming to somewhat similar conclusions, certainly about alternative modernities. I think in Iran, photography was a very important conduit to modernism, and that was again taken up post 1979 by the avant-garde. So I do think we have a different trajectory than in European and Western art. Well, this brings us, do Ali or Maryam have any comments for Talinn? No, you're totally convinced. That's great. So, Ali, we're delighted you could join us today because I know you're a very busy man. And so I would like you, you're our epitome of a global diasporic artist. And we would like you to discuss your career a little bit, present your work, and how perhaps it is informed by the questions we're discussing. So, Ali, please,
Sure.
you have the floor.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see. And does this look okay? Yeah. So I thought I'll just kind of show some slides of my works, and mostly the works that I'm going to show are new works made this year, with the exception of a few others. And then everybody could make up their mind about the topic, really, because I'm just going to talk about the work first. So this work I made in January 2020. So a little bit about the way I work. My process is that I start the painting quite abstractly, and I really don't know what the outcome's going to be. So it's very sort of spontaneous in a way. And I must say that there's aspects of notes of sounds that I actually hear while I'm making the painting, which helps me compose the work. The figures always end up coming out later. I see within the fragmentations that I create possibilities, and then I sort of go after it and bring them out or destroy them or have them stay in this sort of between stage per se. And before I make any painting, I must say that there's a lot of research that I do by a particular topic. I mean, it could be any topic that catches my attention. In this case, let's say a topic of pandemic. I want to, whenever a subject comes about that catches my attention, I want to research its history, read books that have been written about it, look at artworks that were made, let's say the Black Death and so on, about those subjects, and sort of feed my visual vocabulary, whatever I can. So when I'm standing in front of the painting, because I don't use any references, I just want things to sort of come as they like, as organically as possible. So this particular painting, as I said, I made it in January 2020, and while I was making it, the painting was in a bluish tone and somehow I wanted to shift towards red, and I'm quite sensitive to color, and the color red somehow alluded some kind of danger, some kind of something anxious, something was, there was enough symbolism in the work that it kind of alluded to me that something was happening. I didn't know what yet. And then the painting was supposed to go to Art Basel Hong Kong, which of course it didn't happen. The painting came back to my studio in March, and this was mid-March, so we already knew what was happening with the pandemic. And as soon as it came back, I knew what the painting was about, and there was enough symbolism in there that I kind of understood why I felt that way, that sort of anxiety and danger from the painting. But then I did go back to the painting, which is something that I never do. I did go back into the painting and added some more symbolism from what I had accumulated in the past month and a half. For example, you have this snowman sort of figure made out of coal or ash with this symbol of crown. And then this figure up here, which I don't have a detail of, there's like crowns coming out of its head. Here's a painting from 2016. I made it in November 2016, called The Rise of the Blonde, without an E. So you could find the blonde here. Here's some details of the painting. Again, just something that wasn't really planned, but somehow the current event that was happening at the time sort of influenced the work in combination with many other art historical references. This painting I finished end of this summer called SOS, which is sort of, I was thinking about it, it's sort of like an underworld in a way. And you have a figure here. I don't know if you could see this, but there's an upside down face here. You might recognize or not. Here's some details. Details of these figures, which are, the figures to me, they're sort of like cast of characters. They're like archetypal characters that might show up in other paintings. And the new paintings, I see them more like as theatrical stages where these figures kind of come and go. Here's a painting called The Prophet. These are all, this is also 2020. And the paintings are always, they're never specific. They're never about a particular time or particular place. They're always worlds within worlds. They're always paintings within paintings. So they could go in and out. They could be from different times. I see them sort of as like a meeting place, like sort of like a time machine where I could have all these different figures sort of like meet. But each figure also is like a hybrid. They're all the figures are sort of a combination of many different things, be it like something that's ancient and something that's current and something that it's futuristic. So they could be a combination of human, animal, vegetation, robotic. So here on the right, you have these like sort of crucified figures. And on the left, you have like, say, this coughing figure, and you have this sort of robotic figure. So the idea, like the titles for me, they always have to sort of be an umbrella that cover a lot of things that are happening at the time in my head, because I work on one painting at a time. So, you know, like where the title is The Prophet, but it's sort of, I want it to stay sort of poetic and not really be specific, but sort of have you kind of make your own decision of what the prophet is. Is it this explosion in the sky? Is it the crucified figures on the right? Is it the coughing figure here? Is it the dancing candles? Is it this person here with mold and vegetation growing out of them? Is it the painting itself? Is it the painter? It could sort of stay open in a way. This was a very urgent painting that I made that's called Only Breath. And another thing that informs my work, I always say my work is about art history, history of our time, and personal history. So in this case, and so like my environment also influences the work. So in this case, this was in the middle of the protests that were happening. I live in Brooklyn, and I don't know wherever you guys were, but there was protests, there were helicopters, there were like fireworks going on for like, I don't know, like a month. So having kind of lived in Iran during the war and experiencing this sort of like chaos and war for 8 years, it for me, I was very sensitive to it, because, you know, you read the news and there's a lot of information in there every day. There's bad information usually, but for it to sort of be in your 2 blocks away from your environment, you kind of like feeling the sense of chaos, seeing the helicopters go by. I had like, this painting was like quite urgent, and the title Only Breath was alluding to the pandemic being it's only the breath, that it's like your breath that's causing this pandemic. And then the protesters who were using their breath to voice their opinion, and then the George Floyd killing, which was taking away his breath. And then of course Only Breath is like my favorite poem by Rumi, which in the poem, he doesn't want to be contained, you know, he doesn't want to be pinned down. And that's, my paintings don't want to be pinned down. They don't want to be, you know, there's a saying that I read. They said that art historians come and categorize and organize everything, and then artists come and mess it all up. So I feel like the paintings sort of don't want to be categorized, don't want to be contained. I don't want to be categorized, and I don't want to be contained. This painting called The Caravan, which you could see the symbolism of right here. Wait, maybe I have a detail of it. It's a caravan. I felt like it was sort of a symbol of the pause of our time in a way, because you have this wheel at the bottom with a figure stuck in there. So the wheel doesn't want to move. So you have this group of figures, you know, they could be international group of figures trying to move, and nothing moves. Everything is sort of stuck. And here's some details of these figures. This is an older painting, but I put it in here because it's titled Language of the Birds, which I think it was mentioned earlier after Ekhtiar's poetry, which I like very much. Seymour is actually my Instagram name. It's like one of my favorite stories that I heard as a child, and it just sort of stayed with me, this idea of like a journey that you take, and it ends up being about the journey, because at the end, when you get there, the answer, you already knew the answer. And I think it was Orhan Pamuk who said, we're always trying to remember what we already know, which is kind of interesting, because it's kind of saying that you're not empty, you know, your mind is not empty, and you're not just going around filling it up. You already know all these things. You're just sort of remembering and shining a light on it. This painting is called Oil. And I guess in a way, I mean, it's never specific, but in a way, I was thinking about oil being this sort of monster that is sort of like coming out of the ground and is like swallowing all these people up. Maybe it's like a curse in a way, a curse in the Middle East or something like that. But of course, at the same time, there's the painter who's using oil as well. So here's a detail. And here's the last painting, which is the last painting I made just a few months ago, and it's pretty optimistic actually. It's called The Healers. And I felt like it's something that everybody needs at this time. So you have these figures that they have these tentacles at their bottom, and they're sort of like cleaning the earth. They're like kind of like healing the earth and cleaning the earth from bad energy, and sort of like hopeful and looking forward to a better future, perhaps. And here's some details of the works. And somehow, you know, like a lot of things, I just want to stay true to my imagination. So anything that I accumulate, be it literature, you know, reading really good novels, or film, or my own personal imagination, or memories, I just want to be able to sort of capture them in a way that that you would try to capture something from a dream, you know, like you kind of see these things and you try to capture it, and they sort of escape. And I'm always trying to I always want to be in the space of trying to capture something that's not tangible, something that's sort of ungraspable. And I'm always trying to figure out, how do I paint that? How do I paint like memories? How do I paint imagination? How do I paint dreams? How do I paint hallucinations? How do I bring this to life? And I think I always was after this. I was always after, because I don't know where they come from, really. I don't know. It's like it's personal, but it's also collective. It's sort of consciousness that's floating in the air, and your head is like an antenna, and you catch the consciousness in the air and try to sort of grasp it somehow and bring it to life. And I think, yep, that's it. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Ali. I think your work is inspirational for all the artists in the audience, how you can retain your own identity, yet become part of the international conversation of contemporary art, and truly, as I said, inspirational and transformative work. I'm going to ask Maryam to present for a few minutes on appropriation. Ali's work uses appropriation, of course, as one of his strategies, going from Bruegel to coffeehouse painting. So I think it's appropriate. Maryam, if you would say a few words, and then we'll go to the audience's questions.
Okay. Many artists actually, contemporary artists use, this sort of mechanism of appropriation, and this is not true of everybody, so one can't really generalize. The problem is we tend to generalize, but there are those who do, and it's interesting how they use and appropriate the traditional aesthetic of Persian historical art in order to present their own, political views or anguish or personal, whatever that is that they want to express. And I know maybe Ali, I'm not sure if your art fits in that category, but I know that earlier on there were a few paintings that sort of alluded to Shahnameh paintings, and I always felt that your paintings, that it's not a one-to-one kind of correspondence. However, what I liked is that I think what you were inspired by might have been things like the horizon line, the high horizon line, or the underlying movement or gyration of a battle scene, or something that's not so, one-to-one. And just wanted to see what you feel or how you explain that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would say that I fit in the appropriation part either, because I feel like I look for visual clues everywhere, and I sort of it could be, like I said, it could be from art history, be it Persian miniature to Bosch and Bruegel and Goya and Venetian painters, to Japanese prints, to ancient Egyptian art. I think I take different parts, but it's not direct. It's more like I look at the essence of the way it was made, right, and then I take that. So I personally do feel like I'm in the legacy of Persian miniature painting, but I'm not because there's a lot of artists who appropriate Persian miniature painting. They use that language. I don't think I'm using the language.
No, I never felt that way either. I always thought it was more about composition or energy or something like that.
Energy, yeah, exactly. So I use the energy, and I use aspects of it, I would say. But like the figures, for example, that I create, like, I don't know how they come about, because they're a combination of chance and me seeing within a fragmentation, and then they sort of come together like atoms and molecules, and they create an organism in a way. So I let them become what they want to become, you know, and they go towards this way or that way in a way, but they don't allude to a particular movement or art, I don't think.
Well, we only have 10 minutes left, and I have some very interesting questions from the audience. So we're going to move ahead. I'm going to answer them in the order I received them, and I don't think we'll get to everyone, but please excuse us if we do not. So one of the first questions was, discuss the influence of Islam on contemporary Iranian art. Has it produced an artistic backlash? Who would like to address that? Maybe Talinn?
The issue with that question is, what is Islamic art? And actually, Ali's extraordinary works speak about what is that Islamic art? Is it and so it? I think again what Ali said is really amazing. That I don't want to be categorized. I don't want to be contained. And this is exactly art historians and the public wants to put them in little boxes, and they're like, no. So the question is, I don't think we even know what that means, Islamic art, and therefore I would say artists, they don't want to be labeled, and the market does it. The art historians do it. They create. And that's their art, regardless of labels.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment? Well, I would just add to that if we look at Islam as the Islamic regime of Iran, I do think in a very specific way, they did affect the development of contemporary Iranian art by privileging calligraphy, non-figurative, no nudity, no depiction of women without the chador. So I do think there are very specific instances, and I do think it did produce a resistance among Iranian contemporary artists that has been very creative and vibrant. Another question, does fine art under authoritarian regimes, whether to the left or the right, become one-dimensional? Maryam, I'd like to ask you to think about that. The big question.
That is a tough one, yes, because I think it does address the left or the right, and if it goes extreme in any of those directions, it does become one-dimensional or one. But I'm not sure if I understand the question exactly, but that's what I would say.
Yeah. Well, I think authoritarian regimes bring with them a number of institutions and a very specific agendas. And so that becomes a very heavy kind of presence in the life of the artist. But at the same time, it brings about a resistance, a backlash. So I do think that it's under the most terrible regimes that you get the most creative art movements and a great deal of political art. So I think it's actually, in a way, it does flourish. When life is boring, art becomes boring. So I do think under authoritarian regimes, we have to be careful not to make generalizations. We have another question on Persian manuscript painting, stating that, as we know, it's linked to storytelling and myths. And the question was, does contemporary Iranian art use these narratives? Of course, we've seen a wonderful selection of Ali's works, and I think they do address this issue, but perhaps you'd like to say a few more words, Ali?
I think if we think about Shahnameh, for example, like Ferdowsi basically took like so many years of stories and mythologies and just like put it all into one place. So it wasn't like Shahnameh, it's not like one linear story. It's like stories within stories that were collected over time. And I feel like if I want to be specific about my work, I think my work goes the other way around, where I'm sort of like giving you the visual part, and then somebody maybe will write the narrative or the story about it, because or it tells me or whoever's looking at it the narrative, where I'm creating the visual side of it, the visual thinking side of it, the visual sort of narrative.
Talinn, do you have a comment, perhaps? Talking about, well, there are artists who interpret Persian manuscript painting and appropriate much more literally. And that is quite widespread in Iran and outside, and particularly among, exilic artists, we see a sort of nostalgia. So I think there are artists who learn, like Ali, how to transform these original models and tropes, and others who interpret them too literally. And we have a range of these artistic strategies. So another
could I just add that we have also extraordinary photographers who take the photographic technology and tell extraordinary stories,
yes,
both in Iran and in the diaspora. So that's just another way how Iranian artists take technology and then appropriate it or bring the local into actually telling the Shahnameh story through the technology of photography.
Yes, there are a number of artists doing that today, very creatively, even pop art kind of allusions and references. So that is a very, very a popular trend. We have another few minutes. I will ask perhaps the last question. I have to skip over a few, but it is a question I think that is important to many members of our audiences, which is, why don't we have a Persian section in museums? And Persian arts and culture existed before Islam, and with a few exclamation marks. How can we explain this to our children and students? Maryam, I won't put you on the spot, but I would like your viewpoint.
I can respond to that to some extent. I mean, we do have Persian section. For example, at the Met, I know that this is a problem for many people. It is under the Department of Islamic Art. We have renamed the galleries in order to bring out the regional and sort of distinctions. And Iran is definitely there. Iran is 65% of the collection at the Met, so one cannot, deny that. And about that much is on view. And so Iran has a huge presence. The galleries cannot be called the Iranian art because there is just so much. There is also non-Iranian art that that it is also a question of how to do that logistically under one umbrella. Well, how do you do that? But this is a question we all are struggling with on a daily basis in museums, yes, about how this balance between the Islamic and the regional and we'll see. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you all for a very interesting and lively discussion. I'm going to end briefly by mentioning there is going to be a conference, a one-day conference on the idea of Iran, the annual symposium at SOAS. And if you go to it's on the 19th century, the early 19th century. And so if you go to SOAS and follow the link to events, you can register. I will end though, because I loved Ali's a comment from Orhan Pumak about artists trying to remember what they already know. And I think that's a perfect description to speak about the question of continuity or rupture in Iranian contemporary art. Thank you everybody for your attention, and a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.